Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 12 of the Future of Work show. For those of you who've been following us over the last 12 weeks, each week we pick up a topic that we think has relevance to our ability to operate as professionals and organizations in a very fast changing world. So, this week we're going to speak about the challenges of entrepreneurship. And I have with me someone who's written not just one, but two books on the same topic, Tendayi Viki from Strategyzer's UK office. And I'm just going to bring him on. Hi, Tendayi.
Hey, hi. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And let me share a little bit of background about Tendayi. Tendayi is a PhD in psychology and then an MBA. He's a very frequent contributor to Forbes and has written two books on innovation, including the Lean Product Startup and his latest book, Pirates in the Navy. So, welcome, Tendayi, to our show today.
Thank you, Jolene. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You know, first, I must say, I just love the title of your book. I loved it so much that you may have noticed I've used it in all our promotional material because I think it's such an evocative title. It's beautiful. I wonder how you came up with the idea of pirates in the Navy.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of things happen while you're writing. So when we were writing the corporate startup, me and my co-author Dan Tomer and Esther Gons, right, we were just like in the introductory paragraph, we were like, Steve Jobs used to say that, it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy. But actually, if you're going to be an innovator working in a large company, you have to start thinking of yourself as a pirate in the Navy. And that's like where we kind of coined the term. And then from there, I just literally lifted that last part of the sentence and made it the title of my next book. So, yeah.
It's a beautiful title. So for my next book, I'm going to search for something equally evocative because that was a learning I had. That it's just one of those books that if it was on a bookshelf, I'd like to at least see what it's about. So
Right.
really, really nice.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you very much.
Then I have one question, really, to start off our conversation today. You have a PhD in psychology, and I'm sure you're really familiar with, the organizational literature. So, you know that we've been talking about the difficulty of managing business as usual and innovation at the same time for decades now. I mean, I think the first big article came in 1976, and then, of course, in I think 2004, the big HBR article by Charles O'Reilly and Tushman came out on the ambidextrous organization. So
Yeah.
it's been like 40 something years, 45-ish years that we've been talking about this difficulty of being innovative and running an established organization. Your entire book speaks to exactly this problem. So, what are your thoughts around? Has any of this become any easier? Have we learned something? Have we forgotten lessons that were learned at one point in time?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because at one level, ambidexterity is a human challenge. It's a human psychology challenge before it even becomes an organizational challenge. It's a human challenge in the sense that what do you do with yourself when you become successful, when you achieve the pinnacle of your success and you have a business model that works, or you have a career that works, or you're a sports person and you've won 12 trophies, whatever. Like, what do you do with yourself then? And so this balance between like really enjoying your success, exploiting and optimizing what you have and making sure that it works really well, while at the same time exploring new opportunities. Like this is a dance that a lot of people sort of struggle with just as individuals. And then when you combine individuals and you put them into an organization and you say, let's do this together, let's like run our core business while exploring new opportunities, you really have to build structures and processes that allow that to happen. I think a lot of people underestimate the power of structures, context, management tools, practices, and how those things constrain people's behaviors and direct them towards doing specific sorts of things. So the challenge is perennial. It's always been around. But the thing that's changing now is the toolbox. So, when Steve Blank starts making the distinction between searching and executing, right? When that distinction is being made with the lean startup movement, with agile and design thinking, and all these practices that have now kind of emerged. We now have a way to say, listen, when you're running your core business, do these things, typical MBA thing. When you're running the explore side of your organization, do these things, run experiments, build hypotheses, design business models, test, iterate, pivot, etc. Right? And this is how you structure those things. So people now know there's two different practices. The next layer, which is not yet common across many organizations, is what does that look like from a management perspective? How do you lead? The Ambidextrous Leader, another article that was written by O'Reilly and Tishman, right? Like, but what does that look like in practice? What are the right things to do? When do you know what toolbox to apply where? How do you make sure you're asking the right questions at the right time? How do you make sure you're not asking your team questions about revenue in year 5 when they're still exploring whether there's a real customer need, right? So all of these things are things that we're still thinking about and kind of working through, but we have evolved, we're getting better.
So you are saying that one of the learnings for us as people who work with organizations and of course business leaders has been a whole new toolbox and a set of and a vocabulary to express different parts of that toolbox.
Exactly, because the challenge of doing innovation inside large organizations was that we were using the toolbox for managing the core business to manage innovation. So if you ask a team, what does it take for you to get investment on new ideas in your company? They'll tell you, well, I have to talk to my manager, and then I have to write a 35-page business plan, and then I have to take that to a board, and then I have to, all of this like kind of ritual. But we're talking about a new idea in a new market where we don't have any customers, right? And so it is that which was stifling innovation, because if the leaders are not convinced by your business case, they're not going to invest in your idea. So you never get a chance to test or experiment and bring real evidence that your idea might have legs, right?
Right. So then let me come to my next question, which really relates to the point you just said, that perhaps as leaders, we haven't quite figured out how to combine some of this. In your book, you speak a lot about, challenges which leaders themselves have, or big, large established organizations have, in creating space for innovation. Can you talk to what some of the biggest challenges actually are?
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you a couple of stories that really illustrate the challenge. So I did some training work in Mexico City a couple of years ago, and I train the leaders, I train the team, and then I get them together to sort of see if they can have a conversation about one idea that we're really thinking about working on. And so the team does the pitch, and then one of the leaders says, you know what, I can't invest in this idea. It doesn't meet our financial hurdle rate. And right there in that moment, you can see that they've spent 3-4 days with me telling them, listen, this is not the question to ask. But when they actually have to do something serious, that's the toolbox they go to. But not only did he say that he can't invest in an idea because it doesn't meet the financial hurdle rate, he then told the team, go and work on your business case and come back when your business case meets the financial hurdle rate. So what he was telling the team was, go and fiddle on the spreadsheet, make sure your spreadsheet meets the financial hurdle rate, and then come back and we'll give you money, which is very different to how the entrepreneurship ecosystem works. When an investor is telling a team to go and figure out something, they're asking them, go and figure out what the customers want to buy. Go and get your first sale. Go and close your first distribution deal, and then come back because you would have shown us that your business has legs. Whereas inside large organizations, we're saying, go work on the spreadsheet and the PowerPoint presentation and then come back to it. And so these habits are really what gets in the way. Another team that I was coaching is asking for just a little bit of money, like $50,000, to go and run their first set of experiments. And the leaders are like, why are you asking for so little money? Do you not believe in your own idea? If you don't believe in your idea, why should we believe in your idea? So you can see that leaders have habits that are really stifling innovation. And because as teams, we know that to succeed inside our organizations, we have to do stuff that pleases our leaders. We end up dropping innovation projects and working on things that are much more likely to be successful and get us the promotions and rewards, right?
But isn't this, Tendayi, very natural? So, I have a similar story. A few months ago, I was working with a leadership team, and, it was actually a strategy retreat, but the intent of that strategy retreat was to come up with new ideas. But people who worked for, their entire career and have become successful in a very established organization. This was a very established organization, have learned to think a certain way, and that certain way works really well when you're managing your core business. But even when you introduce a set of ideas, uh, it's still something that they haven't actually lived through, and they've just probably heard, like maybe in the case of the team that you were coaching. So how does one even begin? Because most people who have careers in an established organization have very conventional MBA sort of careers, and I've had them also
Mhm.
for a period of time, where you sort of you understand how to run a particular function well, and then you rise through the ranks of an organization using the idea which the organizational leaders use to decide what's a winner or what's not a winner as an idea to back. So how does one learn this new set of ideas when perhaps one is never really going to experience it, the way an entrepreneur would, when your feet are to the fire and that's
Yeah.
all that there is to be done. So,
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. When you said natural, my first instinct was like, well, it's not natural. It's not like,
yeah,
it's an acquired behavior. It's learned.
yeah,
And
it's
so
learned.
what's natural about it is that it's habitual. It's something you're used to. That's your go-to form of thinking when you're evaluating ideas. And so the way to break habits and acquire new habits is to try. And so what we learned was I used to do this work where I used to set up innovation boards and I would train them and then leave them to it. And then when I came back to check in on them to see like how well they were doing, I found that they were doing the same thing that they'd always done. And so what I do now is rather than just set the innovation board, I also sit on the board, right? And then we do a debrief after every meeting to say, how did that go? And say, well, when you were asking this
Right,
question, you were heading in the wrong direction. When you were asking this question, you were heading in the
right.
wrong direction. So it's really like coaching now. It's like,
Yeah,
like almost like a trainer, like, when you go to the gym and you got a personal trainer,
yeah,
that's the work we kind of have to do to help our leaders acquire new habits. But the second piece of this is also tools. You
yeah.
have to give leaders tools. So we have a cheat sheet that we call right question, right time. And we just sort
Nice.
of give them the cheat sheet and say, like, when we're having this conversation, try and ask like what some of these questions rather than these typical ones that you're used to. And then they have something to sort of hang their hats on, right? So that they can
Right.
actually, use that as a thinking tool.
That's a very nice idea. And I was speaking a few months ago with a lady called Kelly Costello. I don't know if you know her. So she used to work with Dublin, and she's been an innovation coach actually for a very, very long time. And one of the things she spoke about was the importance of innovation coaches when
Mhm.
established organizations are
Mhm.
trying to live some of the things that they've learned. And
Yeah.
like we know from the world of learning and development, that what you learn in a program is perhaps a set of ideas, a little bit of vocabulary, and maybe a bit of familiarization with what this might look like. But for anything to change, it takes a sort of someone holding your hand and
Mhm.
saying, like the way you said that, take a look at this. Maybe you should ask something like that. So that's really, really interesting. But then, Tendai, one of the things you spoke about in your book, and perhaps touched upon in a later article as well, was how many organizations, established organizations, develop innovation theaters. So, innovation on display, perhaps. Could you speak to some of those challenges and how they interfere?
Yeah. So the way I frame it in Pirates in the Navy is, and I think that's why the book is resonating a little bit, is that when you tell a story, right? You need a protagonist. You need something that you're standing up against. Something the enemy thing to sort of attack. And
Mhm.
with innovation in large organizations, the enemy has always been the organization, the company, and the leaders and the MBAs. But actually, in Pirates in the Navy, I take a different approach and I talk about the authenticity of the entrepreneur themselves.
Mhm.
And so I start to challenge entrepreneurs to say, one of the things that you have to be authentic about is doing the right things, right? Making sure you're working on stuff that matters. And so From my perspective, the fundamental value of innovation is that it helps organizations navigate themselves into the future, right? At the efficiency level, it helps you optimize your processes and do things that make you more competitive, right? And then you move towards the transformational edge of innovation and you're launching new businesses and new products and new business models. And what that's doing for your companies is giving you new revenue streams to sustain your business again into the future and keep yourself competitive. So any activity that people do that is not related to achieving those outcomes is innovation theater. And so you can have an innovation lab with sticky notes, hackathons, and idea jams, and idea submission platforms, and all of these things that we build. And if none of those things are pointed towards helping the company create value so it can sustain itself into the future, it's just innovation theater. And we call it innovation theater, things that look like innovation, but are not really creating any impact in practice. And so we try and tell entrepreneurs to stop doing that stuff, because the more and more they do those things, the less and less impact they have on their organizations. And then leaders are like, yeah, we've been funding that innovation lab for the last 4 or 5 years. What have they produced there of value? And the answer is, well, nothing. They haven't really launched anything new. They've just been having events and pizza nights and all this stuff. And so then the innovation leaders are like, well, we should shut them down. And then when later on, when someone like me comes and says, you need to do more innovation, they just say, no, we tried the innovation thing. It doesn't work, right? But it's like, no, you didn't try the innovation thing. That was innovation theater. And so it just makes the conversations harder.
Is it though that innovation theater is it like the first step? Why I'm reminded of this was that so many decades ago, I used to dance. And when I was a little kid, a little girl, maybe like 5 or 6 years old, what attracted me to dance was the stage, and I'd gone to see a recite, actually a performance, and you look at all these elegant, beautiful dancers. Then you kind of look at that and say, oh, how lovely it would be to be up on that stage and be a dancer. But that's true of many professions, that what you see as a sort of on-stage performance, behind that there's a lot. That it's the on-stage performance that often hooks you. So I'm wondering, because so many of the people who are also working as entrepreneurs are doing it for maybe the first time in their lives or the first time inside an organization, could this just be like, you have to get over that to move on, but you have to at least experience that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's true. I say to people, everybody wants to be Steve Jobs, but the Steve Jobs they want to be is the Steve Jobs on stage launching the iPhone. Right? They don't want to be Steve Jobs every day coming to work, grinding and trying to figure out how to make this thing work. And so, in some sense, your analogy works, but in another sense, it doesn't, right? Because if you're a dancer, the stage is the final product. That's actually the thing that you're aiming towards. You're aiming towards getting on stage and performing. When you finish performing, that's it. Like that's the end of the show. With innovation, the stage is not the end, right? The stage is just a launch pad. Like when you go from grinding to being on stage, what then matters is what happens when you get back off stage to the product you just launched. And so the stage for an innovator, the goal, the ultimate measure of success for an innovator is whether or not you created net revenue, whether or not you've built something that can scale, whether or not you've built something that customers really love, whether or not that's your stage, right? The performance part, that's not your stage. The performance part is just a way to make the things you're doing visible, right? And so, and that's what we don't communicate to folks a lot, right? They do stuff and then get on stage, and then once they're on stage and they're doing the pizzazzy thing, and then they think they're done. But actually, in Texas, they call it big hat, no cows, right? You appear to be successful, but you're not. Yeah.
So, follow-on question. Now I'm wondering, see, the whole idea of the ambidextrous organization was that you have one part of the organization which does business as usual, and that was, some of the early recommendations, that you can't have both of them living in the same part of the organization. So you sort of divvy up the organization and say, okay, you go into business as usual, you go into innovation. And yet, as we've seen over the last few decades, that isn't so easy. And I think you speak a lot about that in the book as well, that, are we creating I think your words were innovation orphans.
Mm.
So can you speak a little bit to that challenge?
Yeah, so that's the second piece of, again, my challenge to entrepreneurs. So the one piece is be authentic and make sure you're working on stuff that is creating value. The other one is be authentic in understanding that there is nothing that you're ever going to create inside your organization that doesn't require you to collaborate with other key functions within the business. So when folks are like, yeah, I got an innovation lab, I'm so happy, I'm so far away from all the MBAs, let's now do cool stuff. And then they come up with all these ideas, they test them, customers love them. And then they turn around to their company and go, here's something that we've been working on. Can you take it to scale? And the company's like, no, we're not going to take that to scale. There's no leader that's interested. Like I've worked with several innovation labs where they've got really great, brilliant ideas that are actually having traction in the market, making money. And their company will not take those things to scale because while they were working on those things, they never bothered to take the time to build relationships with the main business and really understand what the strategic goals of the leaders are, right? Because so everybody knows if I'm a head of a division or if I'm a head of a business, right, within a bigger business, I'm busy already. I already have like 20 ideas of my own. The people that are working with me are hitting me with hundreds of other ideas. So when you turn up with your thing from the lab, it's just like another thing that I have to deal with that I don't have to deal with. You were not on my roadmap for the year. You were never on my plan. I don't know who you are or the thing that you're working on is. You're just noise. So my first reaction to you, which is natural in the way that you think about it, right, is to say, go away. And so teams are like, but they put us in the lab and now they're telling us to go away. It's like, yeah, they put you in the lab, but your job is to build a bridge. Entrepreneurs are very different from entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have to do two things well: be really creative, inventive, come up with really cool stuff, but also build a bridge to the core business. And this ability to build a bridge to the core business is the superpower that distinguishes an entrepreneur from an entrepreneur running their own startup. And so in celebrating entrepreneurs, we have forgotten to teach entrepreneurs this other skill, which they need to have in order to actually succeed. Right?
I love that because what you're saying is that entrepreneurship is different in one very important way from entrepreneurship. It is, of course, about finding a new business idea that's likely to lead to more revenue, more growth for the organization, but it's also about learning to play within the organization so that your idea finds the kind of traction and influence that it needs. So, in a sense, entrepreneurs have to be almost twice as skilled or skilled in two very different ways of working. The way,
They
the
have
way
to,
of
yeah,
the
they
way
need
of
paradoxical skills, skills
correct.
that are usually contradictory, right? You have to be buccaneering
Yeah,
and inventive and explorative, and at the same time collaborative
yeah.
and relationship building. And so it's very unique. Successful entrepreneurs are very, very unique and rare. And we need to be able to build that, that skill set in them.
It's so interesting. Tell me, the successful entrepreneurs that you've worked with, are they people who have started their careers out with the large established organizations and therefore have that circle of influence, but have this, in a sense, longing to do something different? Or are they more who are largely entrepreneurial in their orientation and could have even been past entrepreneurs and then moved? Do you
Yeah.
think there's a
So
type?
yeah. So there's so many different variations of how people come to this, right? I mean, Jeff Bezos is a successful entrepreneur now, in
Yeah.
the sense that he was an entrepreneur before, and as the business he pioneered got successful, he still figured out a way to not rest on his laurels and start launching new stuff. And so that's one path. Another path is sometimes the startups are acquired by large companies, and then the teams join the company, and then some of them quit because they're really frustrated by how large companies work. And then those that remain sometimes are able to build relationships and become really, really, really entrepreneurial. But usually the really successful entrepreneurs are people who were in the business for a while
Yeah.
and have built relationships. We call them innovation ambassadors sometimes. They're able to, and especially when they're leading innovation teams. If you're leading an innovation team, you're able to allow your innovation team to work on really breakthrough stuff without noise and interference from the main business. So you sort of provide air cover for your teams, and you go out and get them resources, and you bring them the resources. You go out and get them outlets and channels, and kind of negotiate those. So yeah, those are the successful entrepreneurs. Those people that can kind of bridge that, right? Yeah. Now, the thing that we're saying though, which is really interesting, and I just want to land this message, we're saying to organizations, why don't you now make it unnecessary to be political? Right? Why don't you actually build into the way you run the company structures and processes that automatically support innovation? So like one of the projects that I love to work with, and people find this strange, but I love this kinds of work, is aligning legal and compliance with innovation teams. So I get legal and compliance together with innovation teams, and we talk about how innovation works, testing, iterating, experimenting, the various steps on that journey. And then we say, okay, so as legal and compliance, how can you support this? And legal and compliance go, okay, but when you're doing these things, here are the rules. When you're doing these things, here are the rules. When you're doing these things, here are the rules. And then we get this playbook. And now each individual innovation team doesn't have to negotiate with legal whenever they want to do something. And that's what we call building a bridge between innovation and the core business. So beyond just being a really great entrepreneur that can build relationships, also try and like structure those relationships so they become repeatable. Because what happens when your ambassador moves on, right? Innovation teams can start to struggle there too.
Yeah, and I think there is some research on the innovation teams that are most successful to have a lot of linkages within the rest of the organization. So they're sort of nested and not too far removed. Perhaps in your terms, don't become orphans too soon, at least.
Exactly. Be a pirate in the Navy.
Be a pirate in the Navy. Great. So I'm going to take a few questions. I think we have 5 minutes or so. Gautam says, innovation is a culture of experimentation, failing, learning, and rising again with the next experiment hypothesis. How do you think this culture can be infused in organizations which are still legacy or old-fashioned?
Yeah, so what organizations need to do, remember, we're not telling organizations to experiment, iterate, fail, get up again, experiment, iterate, fail, get up with their core business. That's not what we're saying. Because the moment you start saying that to them, that's just like that's also waste. It's too disruptive to test things you already know. We're saying build structures that are slightly away, separate from the core business, and run those structures separately. And once leaders understand this distinction between exploring versus exploitation, it gives them that sense of, okay, you're not asking me to tinker with my core business. Instead, you're asking me to create another structure that drives these sorts of behaviors. And that's really what we're asking for.
Right. So in a sense, along with entrepreneurs understanding how to do both, your organizational leaders will, over the next decade or two, also learn how to wear two different hats. So be ambidextrous in their own, in the way they do their regular work.
Yeah, I mean, without leadership support, innovation cannot
happen. Right. Let's see. There are lots of comments. Thanks, Vinay. Thanks, Smita, who say it's very inspiring. Lakshmi says, very true, organizations are built for efficiency, and if they use the same method and metrics to evaluate innovations, it falls apart. Dheeraj says that absolutely makes sense. It's a continuous exercise. Arvind says, wonderful, thank you. Jyoti says, great, very inspiring. Anshuman says, innovation for innovation's sake never works. For most of us, it is important to look at an actual problem and try and solve it. And creativity precedes innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't be working on stuff that nobody wants because it doesn't solve anyone's problem. And so the role of the innovator is not to have a hackathon. The role of the innovator is to figure out whether the stuff we're working on actually helps customers. And then if a hackathon is a solution for creating the value, then do that. But don't go to hackathon because it's a cool thing to do, right? That's really what we're trying to teach people. Yeah.
So your top 2 or 3 suggestions for people who are working in established organizations but feel a desire to become entrepreneurs or part of an innovation lab, what would be 2 or 3 things that you would suggest they can start doing wherever they are so that they have the kind of ambidextrity you spoke about when they move into an innovation role?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is Forget everything you've heard, even from me. Go out into your organization and really understand where you are. Like, be really savvy and context aware. Like, how does my company work? How have the innovators failed before? Where are all the landmines? Talk to innovators who've tried and failed, or people who are running innovation programs, and kind of really understand where the struggles are. Understand your context really, 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 really well. That's the first step towards becoming successful. Then the next step is you need to get good at your craft. Like, you have to be undeniably good. The reason why you have to be undeniably good, like you have to be really great at your craft, is because you're trying to bring something new to the world. So you can't be just so-so and lukewarm, right? You have to be really good at the craft. So you go and master how to do the work really, really well. If you take that together with a really clear understanding of your context and you mix those things together, I think you can really succeed, right?
Thanks. That's really, really helpful. Uh, Last 3 or 4 comments. Gautam asks, how can governments be like innovators? I don't know if that's too large a topic.
It is a big topic, but again, governments are learning how to do it, right? Like, like the UK government, right, had like a whole unit that was like running agile, and when they did the digital transformation, when Obama was president, the US government had a large innovation unit. So governments are doing it as well, but it's the whole thing about balancing doing everyday government business versus the transformational pieces. So the dance still remains the same there. Yeah.
Right. So I think that's it. I think those were my questions. Thank you so much, Tendayi. This is such an interesting topic, how to build better entrepreneurs. Uh, I'm sure you have this experience all the time, but most established organizations are searching for something that will work for them. And at this point, I think different organizations are trying this in many, many different formats. For instance, one large group I know decided that they're going to only incorporate young people into an innovation lab. So, they had a cutoff at 18 months to 5 years, and no one older than that they thought was fit to be in an innovation lab. That's also just an experiment. I'm not sure how that will play out, but that's an experiment. So you see so many different formats at this time. So this is a puzzle that I think we're all sort of trying to find our way around, because of the central problem that today's organizations, the established ones, are so good at one part of the business, and this is still like a second language where they're sort of building fluency, and we'll hopefully get there, but still building fluency.
Yeah, no, thank you. Everything you say is absolutely right. It is like learning a second language. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Tendayi. Thank you so much. Thank you. So with that, we come to the end of today's conversation. I hope you really enjoyed it. I thought it was really insightful. I've actually been following Tendayi's work for a while now, and I find many of what he speaks about extremely insightful. I also like the words he uses, so that's another big plus. Now, next week, we're going to meet again on Saturday, and we're going to speak about design-led business transformation. So do join us. The replay of today's conversation will, of course, be available on my LinkedIn profile right after our conversation. And in a couple of days, it will also be available on Uncube's website. So do check it out there. If you enjoyed our conversation, like it, comment, and please share it on yours so that people who are connected to you also have a chance to listen into our conversation. With that, we're at the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you again next week.